Hello, and welcome to my DaVinci Resolve course. So before we get started, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about. Number one, I want to talk about what this course is and what you can expect. This course is a basic DaVinci Resolve learning course. I'll be walking through from A to Z the steps in creating content that could benefit you or your business or your YouTube channel or whatever content you want to create it for. The purpose of this course is to give you the tools that you need to create great videos quickly. I am not teaching you advanced techniques, visual effects, or anything that you would need for, high production quality type projects. This Resolve course is designed to teach you how to use the free version of Resolve and equip you with the knowledge that you need to make videos for whatever you need to make them for. This course, as I mentioned previously, is not an advanced techniques course. There are many of those out there. This isn't designed to teach you how to use DaVinci Resolve so that you can get a job at Hollywood. This course is not going to cover the fusion and a little bit of the cut tabs in DaVinci Resolve. And if you don't know what those are, that's just fine, because we are going to start at ground zero. But if you're already relatively familiar with DaVinci Resolve and you know how to do most everything from importing to editing to cutting to layering videos to doing some audio mixing and some advanced color grading, not advanced, but some color grading, then this course isn't for you. So without further ado, I'm really excited about this. Let's get started. Okay, so in this first window that I have pulled up, this is the projects window. The projects window that you were greeted with is usually just the first thing that you're going to see in DaVinci Resolve when you open it up. I've already opened up DaVinci Resolve and I've opened up the project window on top of it. So when you open up DaVinci Resolve, you'll probably just see this window here that I'm moving around. You'll probably just see it and you won't see this in the background. That's beside the point. So you can see here, I have a couple projects that I've opened up that I've been working on. And so I've created a folder right here that is it's just called Resolve Course. Now when you're in this window, you can right click and do a new project, you can do a new folder, you can import, and you have a few other options. Basically what we're going to focus on is creating a new project and a new folder. So I've already created it, but I'm going to do it again just for the sake of education. So I'm going to click new folder, and let's call this folder, there's 100 different ways you can organize it. This is completely up to you. But what I would probably do is say, oh, this is for my DaVinci Resolve course. If I can type. Okay, boom. Then it's created, okay? Then you double click on that, just like navigating, a folder on your home PC. And then in here you can either right click into new project or you can do new project, right? And it's asking me this because I've already started another project and haven't saved it. So I'm just gonna cancel, but that's how you would do that. So I'm gonna go back and I'm actually gonna delete that folder. Go ahead and delete that, that's actually fine. So I'm going to go into here, and this is the one we're already working on. So I'm just going to close this window. But if you're opening this for the first time, or if you're opening it back up to work on it on another day, you would double click on this to open up your project. So let's go ahead and get into our project. So DaVinci Resolve looks a little bit scary to begin with, but it's actually a lot simpler than you might think. So just some housekeeping items. We'll go kind of from top to bottom, from left to right. So starting up here at the top left, you have your Resolve, and you can click on it and just get different things. You can look at your preferences, you can do keyboard customization, which is really important. Actually, this is super, super important. I'm not going to go through this on, how you want to organize it, but there's a lot of things in here that you can do to help your workflow go a lot faster. But we're not going to go through that just because that's your own preference. Once you get used to Resolve with the standard hotkeys, I would recommend using the majority of the standard hotkeys the way they're already set up, and then making minor adjustments if you need to. A lot of people get really crazy. They even have multiple keyboards, believe it or not, and they will edit their video projects with 3 or even I've seen 4 different keyboards and stuff where they have all of their hotkeys just to be able to edit very quickly. We're not going to be going over that just because, again, this, like I mentioned before, this is a simple course and basically we don't need to go over a lot of that stuff. So then you have File, and a lot of this is self-explanatory. Most of it we actually won't even use, but you can import files, projects, timelines, and other things. We'll go over what all that means. You have your edit, trim, timeline, clip, all of these different menus. We're not going to talk about these in detail just because they don't affect your daily editing workflow. There's not a lot in here that you need to know about. So let's move down into our windows here. So what we have here is we have a representation of our media import tab. Okay, we'll go over the other tabs here in a moment, but for now you can resize some of these. You can see this, so I can resize this so I can see, oh, look at that, my main drive I'm using 70%, so on and so forth. And right here is the media preview that's on your computer. So what I've done is, let's say I go into my, I have a specific drive that I use for my projects, and you'll click on that, whatever drive, okay? And in here, I have the different folders, right? Videos, which you can see I have my videos and whatnot. And the video footage that we're going to be using is actually from a wedding that I did. So we're gonna be cutting together a couple clips just to illustrate, to illustrate what I'm trying to teach. So this right here is where you want to add favorites, and what you'll do is you'll go into your whatever drive that you keep your projects on. You go to your users, your main user, that's my user Donovan, and then it lists the folders, things you might need for the project, like in your downloads, your music, your pictures, and your videos. Those are typically things that you'll want to use during your project. So what I've done is I've gone in here and I've right-clicked on videos, and you can add it to favorites right here. So add a folder to favorites. I've already done so I don't need to. And if I'm not mistaken, oh yeah, you can click and drag it as well. So it's pretty simple. Okay, so that way I don't have to go through my users and find my media every single time. It's a time-saving feature that I really appreciate. So I will go down to my favorites here, and I'll click on videos. Now I'm going to go into my footage folder that I've already brought onto my computer, and I'm going to just import a few of these videos and this sound right here. Now what I'm doing is I'm selecting these on my computer, and you can get a preview of them just by hovering over them like this. And you can also get a preview by clicking on it and then looking at it over here on the side, just like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this one. I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm going to select multiple items, just like you would if you were navigating on your PC. Select multiple items, and I'm going to drag and drop them into my media pool right down here. So let off and drag and drop them into my media pool. Now you may get this error or you may not, but basically what this means is when I set up DaVinci Resolve, it asked me, if I wanted to be 4K, 1080p, or 720p. I put 1080p at 24 frames per second. The reason why that's important is because for most online content, and especially what I'm going to be teaching you how to do, we're going to be working in 1920 by 1080, or in other words, there's 1900 pixels by 1080 pixels, 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Some of these clips were recorded in 60 or even 120 frames per second, just because they're from a wedding that I did, and for that specific type of content, I am slowing down the footage to get that cinematic slow motion effect. It's not necessary for the content that you do, but you may run into that, and we'll talk about frame rates and different things once we get into editing. But what you need to know is that DaVinci Resolve is recognizing that these clips are at a different frame rate. In other words, there's more frames being displayed per second with these clips versus our timeline. So our timeline, again, like I mentioned, is 24 frames per second at 1920 by 1080. Some of these clips don't match that frame rate. So this is asking the clips, in parentheses S, you have different frame rates than the current project settings. Would you like to change your timeline frame rate and video format to match? 99 times out of 100, we want to click no. Because when we set up Resolve, or when you go into your project settings, which I can show you how to change before we start editing, you want to set your project settings and then leave it there, and you don't want it to fluctuate, or you don't want to change, because what will happen is, let's say that I decide, let's say my clips are at 60 frames per second, and I want to edit and export at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second, because 24 is cinematic and 30 is there's some online content that's at 30 frames per second, or if you've watched like a sitcom, typically those are at 30 frames per second. They look like slightly smoother. They almost have like a home video type look, right? And that might be what you're going for. That's fine. But I like to work in 24 frames per second just because it's the cinematic frame rate. So let's say that I did change my timeline to match my footage. What will happen is then I'll be editing and exporting at 60 frames per second. So if you upload it online, when people try to watch it back, it'll be played back at 60 frames per second. Might be a good thing. Maybe that's what you're going for. If you're working with, let's say you're a game streamer and you stream video games and you record your games or stream them at 60 frames per second. Well, then you'll want your project timeline to be 60 frames per second, so that when people watch it back, they're watching it in 60 frames per second with the game, because with video games, typically you want those for smoother frame rates. But if you're creating content online and you want it to be either cinematic or just have that 24 frames per second look, then we'll go for 24 frames per second. We'll primarily be working with 1080p footage. When I say 1080p, I mean the resolution, 1900 by 1080 pixels. And so we're mostly going to be working in 1080p or full HD resolution. Most cameras and different things record at that frame rate by default. Many of them have 4K settings, so if you're using your phone or something that has a 4K setting to record at. But even in that case, we don't want to stretch our timeline to be 4K, because let's say we have a 4K video and a 1080p video, right? The difference is, I don't know if I can illustrate this, the difference is like this is more so 1080p, this is 4K, right? So you're looking at a huge difference. And so you'll have to stretch your 1080p footage to match 4K, and then it might look blurry, and it's a whole mess. So moral of the story, to make things simple and for online content, we're mostly worried about recording and making content in 1920 by 1080 pixels or 1080p full HD at 24 frames per second, or 30. That's appropriate too. You can do 30 if you like, but I prefer 24 frames per second. So we are going to click do not change. change. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. The import tab is really, really straightforward. This lower section here that says master is the footage we've imported into our project file, meaning that DaVinci Resolve is now connecting this project to where the footage is stored on the computer. So it's created a path so it knows where to find it, so it can use that to display it for you inside the project. If we need to add something later, we can do that. So let's say I'm like, oh, I forgot this clip. I intentionally left it out. A, because it's not an amazing clip. I didn't record it very well at the time. It was windy, I think, at this particular moment. But B, to also illustrate that if I forgot, I can click that and bring it in if I need to. But we don't want that one, so we're not going to import that one. So that's most of what you need to know in the import tab. If you get lost in here, or if something isn't where you expect it to be, so let's say it looks like this, then you can click on, see these icons up here at the top, you can click on any of these icons to display more information if you need it. So media storage, that's reading our computer and showing us where it is on the computer, and then we can click and drag it into our project. Okay, so that's the media tab in a nutshell.